You've found Dreamtime Science, part classroom, part lullaby, entirely devoted to satisfying your curiosity while you find your way to sleep. You know, I've been thinking about how nature can sometimes feel so delicate, yet so incredibly resilient. There's something remarkable about the way entire ecosystems can unravel and then, with time and patience, find their way back to life again. Tonight, I'd love to share a few stories about those moments of collapse and the surprising ways the natural world begins to heal itself. If you find peace in these nocturnal discoveries, consider becoming a regular visitor to our quiet corner of science. Share in the comments what topic you'd love to dream about next. Let's prepare for tonight's journey. Find your most comfortable position, let tension float away from your body, and take 3 slow, peaceful breaths. In the hush of night, when the world softens and the mind opens to quiet wonder, let us drift together into the living tapestry that underlies all the forests, oceans, and fields of Earth. Consider, just for this hour, the true nature of life's great orchestra. A symphony composed not of music, but of interwoven existences, each thread trembling in response to its neighbors. The concept of an ecosystem is not merely a scientific term, boxed and catalogued for textbooks. It is the heartbeat of the living world, its pulse both delicate and thunderous, its rhythm ancient as the stars. Imagine the first rays of dawn stretching across a dew-soaked meadow. Here, everything breathes in unison. The grass shivering under the weight of tiny droplets, insects stirring in their hidden refuges, unseen mycelium threading beneath the soil, and in the distance the low chorus of awakening birds. What appears to us as a collection of separate things, a tree here, a fox there, a chorus of frogs somewhere in the reeds, is, upon closer inspection, an intricate web of dependencies, exchanges, and silent negotiations. This is the heart of an ecosystem, a mosaic of living and non-living components, bound together by flows of energy and cycles of matter. The soil is not just dirt, but a bustling metropolis of bacteria, fungi, and invertebrates, each breaking down the detritus of last season's leaves into nutrients that feed the roots of trees. The trees, in turn, stretch skyward, their leaves capturing sunlight in a miracle of molecular machinery, transforming radiant energy into the sugars that fuel their growth and, by extension, the lives of caterpillars and squirrels, birds and beetles. When a fox prowls the edge of the meadow, it is hunting not merely for a meal, but participating in an ancient, ceaseless dance, predator and prey, growth and decay, creation and consumption, all woven together. This balance is both robust and exceedingly fragile. For millions of years, ecosystems have evolved toward a shifting equilibrium, a homeostasis that is never static but always responsive, always in flux. A drought may wither streams and parch the soil, but the roots of old trees hold firm, and seeds bide their time for better seasons. A wolf returns to a forest, and suddenly deer tread more lightly. Saplings rise where once they were browsed to stubble, and birdsong multiplies in the new thickets. In these living systems, every action ripples outward, like a pebble dropped in a still pond. Yet it is in this very interconnection that ecosystems reveal their fragility. Remove a single keystone, an apex predator, a vital pollinator, a foundational plant, and the whole tapestry can unravel, sometimes in slow, invisible ways, sometimes in catastrophic collapse. The shattered symphony of life is not mere metaphor. It is a warning, echoing from the vanished forests and silent rivers of our planet's past. Now close your eyes and let your thoughts wander to a world conjured in the collective imagination, the bioluminescent jungles of Pandora as seen in the film Avatar. There, every living thing pulses with light, and the roots of the great home tree wend their way through the soil, connecting not only plants but animals, and perhaps even consciousness itself. It is a vision born of longing and awe, a world where the intertwining of life is so complete, so visible and vibrant, that the loss of a single creature is felt by all. In Pandora, the Na'vi people do not merely inhabit their world, they participate in it, bound by ritual, respect, and an understanding that their fortunes are braided with those of every fern and flying beast. Though Pandora is a fiction, it draws deeply from truths observed in the wild places of our own world. The science of ecology, which seeks to understand these living networks, reveals that even the most humble patch of forest is more wondrous and complex than any storybook. Consider a rainforest, a cathedral of green where sunlight is precious and life competes in every niche. Epiphytes cling to the high branches, drawing moisture from the passing mist. Ants herd aphids like cattle, harvesting their sweet secretions. Fungi weave a subterranean net, shuttling nutrients from tree to tree, enabling the oldest giants to nourish their sapling kin. In the darkness beneath the leaves, a jaguar prowls, its presence a silent regulator of balance, culling the strong and sparing the weak, ensuring the continued renewal of life. Or look to the coral reef, a city beneath the waves, painted in colours too dazzling for words. Here, tiny polyps build vast limestone fortresses, offering shelter and sustenance to an explosion of species. Parrotfish graze the coral gardens, excreting the sand that will become tomorrow's beach. Cleaner wrasses dance inside the jaws of groupers, plucking parasites in a delicate bargain of trust. If the water warms, if the chemistry shifts, the corals bleach and die, and the city falls silent, a single note missing, then another, until the whole symphony is lost. Yet not every ecosystem is so lush, so obviously alive. In the frozen tundra, life must endure in slow motion, each summer a brief and frantic celebration, each winter a test of patience and persistence. Here, the balance is no less intricate for its subtlety. Lichens, those strange unions of fungus and algae, cling to rocks and provide food where nothing else can. The caribou migrate vast distances, their hooves stirring ancient soils, their passage essential to the rhythm of the land. Even the Arctic fox, as it hunts and scavenges, plays its part in a web that stretches across continents and seasons. Across all these places, the defining feature of an ecosystem is neither its beauty nor its bounty, but the ceaseless flow of energy and the cycling of matter. Sunlight streams down, captured by plants, and transformed into the living flesh of herbivores, which in turn feed the carnivores. Each death returns nutrients to the earth, feeding the microbes and worms that restart the cycle anew. Water evaporates, condenses, falls as rain, and seeps through roots, carrying minerals and life itself from mountain to sea. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, these elements are shuffled and reshuffled, written and rewritten into the bodies of countless creatures across years, centuries, and epochs. It is tempting sometimes to imagine that we stand outside this system, observers looking in. Yet humanity is as much a part of the great symphony as any wolf or willow. Our cities, for all their concrete and glass, remain dependent on the cycles of air and water, the pollination of crops, the decomposition of waste. We plant and harvest, build and burn, altering the tempo and the tone of the orchestra. Sometimes we play harmonious chords, fostering new growth and abundance. Sometimes our hands slip, and the music stutters, dissonant and harsh. The lesson of ecology is not one of distance, but of belonging. To live is to participate, to shape and be shaped in turn. The language of science, precise and careful, offers us words to describe these relationships, producers and consumers, trophic levels and niches, mutualism and competition. But beneath these terms lies a deeper truth, one that poets and storytellers have long intuited, that all life is entangled, that the fate of the honeybee and the wildflower, the salmon and the bear, the fungus and the root are all bound up together. In the gentle silence of the night, Listen for the echoes of this ancient song. Even the smallest creatures play their part, the earthworm churning the soil, the bat pollinating a desert cactus, the plankton blooming in the vast blue abyss. Each is both an individual and a node in a vast, intricate network, a network that extends not just across space, but through time, connecting the living to the long dead, the present to the possible future. Yet, for all its grandeur, the symphony is vulnerable. The harmony can be shattered by careless hands, by the introduction of an invasive species, the draining of a wetland, the felling of a forest. Each change sends ripples outward, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming. The disappearance of a single pollinator can doom an orchard. The loss of a predator can unleash cascades of unchecked growth and collapse, like a violin section suddenly silenced mid-performance. And so, as our minds drift through the tangled pathways of the world's ecosystems, we find ourselves drawn again to the wisdom of cultures that have understood for millennia the necessity of respect and restraint. Indigenous peoples the world over have crafted stories, rituals, and practices that recognize the kinship of all beings, the need to give thanks, to tread lightly, to remember that every life is sustained by countless others. Whether speaking of the Dreamtime of Australia, the sacred groves of Africa, or the animist traditions of Northern Europe, these cultures remind us of what science now affirms. The web is fragile, and its damage can be slow to heal if it heals at all. The science fiction vision of Pandora is, perhaps, a dream of what might be or what might have been, a place where the shimmering threads of connection are visible to all, where loss is immediately felt and balance is swiftly restored. Yet, even on Earth, there are moments when the pattern becomes clear. The return of wolves to Yellowstone, reshaping rivers and forests. The rewilding of fields in England, bringing back nightingales and butterflies. The patient work of restoration in coral nurseries, where fragments are lovingly nurtured back to life. Through all these stories runs a single, quiet truth. The world is not a collection of things, but a communion of subjects, each with its own needs, its own gifts, its own place in the song. The shattered symphony can sometimes be mended. The notes can be retuned, the harmonies reforged. But always the work is delicate, the outcome uncertain, the beauty all the more precious for its vulnerability. Let your thoughts linger a while longer in this realm of living connections, where every breath is borrowed, every meal a gift, and every life both a solo and a chorus. Outside your window, the night is alive with unseen movements, a moth drawn to moonlight, a fox padding softly through the grass, the slow unfurling of a fern. Each is a thread in the tapestry, a note in the music, a promise of morning yet to come. But as we drift deeper into sleep, let us not forget the shadows that edge the beauty, the threats that loom over the fragile balance, the forces that can tip the scales from harmony to silence. For in the coming hours, our journey will lead us into the heart of disruption itself, where the symphony falters and the consequences of imbalance become starkly, painfully clear. Once, long before the hush of city lights and the steady pulse of highways, the world was a fabric woven with living threads. Each strand, a beetle in the duff, a mushroom beneath the moss, a bird's egg trembling on a branch, braided itself into the larger pattern of life. In the great forests, rivers and seas, the tapestry shimmered, self-repairing, subtle and strong. But even the sturdiest weave may unravel, one loop unhooking the next, until the pattern blurs and the fabric falls apart. To understand how an ecosystem collapses is to watch this tapestry fray, thread by thread, and to trace the invisible tensions that hold it or break it beneath our gaze. Let us slip quietly into a northern forest at the edge of spring. Here the snowmelt pools in hollows, and the air is laced with the scent of thawing earth. Above, old spruces lift their arms, nets of needles catching the sun. At first glance all seems well. The wrens are stitching their nests, and the moss glows with hidden life. But if we look closer, the signs of strain become visible, a thinning of the canopy, a gnawing quiet where once frogs chorused, patches of bark chewed raw by desperate deer. Each of these hints at a story of unraveling, a story both ancient and new. Ecosystems do not shatter in a single moment. More often, their collapse is a slow, almost imperceptible process, a drift toward imbalance. This is the paradox of their resilience. For a time, they can absorb shocks. A dry summer, a new predator, a lost pollinator. These are blows, but not yet fatal. The secret of their endurance lies in redundancy and diversity. When one species falters, another may step in, filling the breach. The soil may host 100 kinds of fungi, each ready to digest what the others leave behind. In a healthy marsh, countless insects may ferry pollen from flower to flower, so the loss of one species is softened by the presence of many. But resilience has its limits. Imagine for a moment a web stretched taut. Each strand supports and is supported in turn. Remove a strand here or there, and the web may hold. Remove enough, or the wrong ones, and the structure sags. It may snap entirely. In ecological terms, this is the threshold effect. Sometimes an ecosystem can absorb disturbance after disturbance, each one compensated for by the flexibility of its parts. But beyond a certain point, the so-called tipping point, change becomes abrupt and irreversible. What was once a forest may become a barren field, or a thriving coral reef may dissolve into a wasteland of algae and rubble. What drives an ecosystem toward this precipice? The factors are as varied as life itself, yet certain patterns emerge. Take, for instance, the relentless press of habitat loss. As forests are cleared for crops or cities, the living space diminishes. Species that once roamed freely are penned into shrinking patches, their populations splintered and isolated. Genetic diversity wanes. When a disease strikes or a drought deepens, these diminished populations cannot recover as they once could. The loss of even a few key species, a keystone predator, a foundational tree, can ripple outward, undermining the very architecture of the community. There is also the invasion of the unfamiliar. When new species arrive, carried by ships, wind, or human intention, they may outcompete or prey upon the natives. The brown tree snake, introduced to Guam, decimated the island's birds. The zebra mussel, hitching a ride in ballast water, has clogged rivers and altered food webs across North America. Sometimes the invader is a microbe, the fungal blight that felled the American chestnut, or the chytrid fungus that has extinguished whole species of frogs. Each arrival is another tug at the tapestry, sometimes gentle, sometimes catastrophic. Climate, too, exerts its force. A change in temperature or rainfall may seem minor from one season to the next, but over years these shifts accumulate. The timing of blooms and migrations slips out of sync. A flower opens, but its pollinator does not arrive. The snowpack melts too soon, leaving nothing for thirsty roots in July. Coral reefs bleach and die as oceans warm, their symbiotic algae expelled by heat. Droughts stretch longer, fires burn hotter, storms grow more violent. The old patterns of life and death, of feast and famine, are rewritten, sometimes too quickly for evolution to keep pace. Yet not all collapses are driven by blunt force. Some are the result of invisible chemical tides. Excess nutrients from fertilizers run off fields and into rivers, triggering blooms of algae that suck the oxygen from water, leaving fish and shellfish to suffocate in the silent green gloom. This is eutrophication, and it has turned once productive lakes and bays into dead zones, their intricate food webs reduced to a few hardy survivors. In all these cases, the mechanics of collapse are shaped by the threads that bind the ecosystem together, by the interactions, dependencies, and feedbacks that define ecological communities. Some species are more vital than others. The loss of a single pollinator may matter little if dozens remain, but the loss of a keystone species, a wolf, a fig tree, a sea otter, can unbalance the whole system. When wolves vanished from Yellowstone, elk populations soared, stripping young trees and altering riverbanks. Only with the wolves' cautious return did the balance begin to restore itself, showing how the presence or absence of a single actor can reverberate through the stage. There is a strange, almost tragic beauty in how these collapses unfold. Consider the kelp forests that once swayed along the Pacific coast, underwater cathedrals sheltering fish and invertebrates. When sea otters, the principal predator of sea urchins, were hunted nearly to extinction, the urchin populations exploded. Their appetites denuded the kelp, leaving barren urchin barrens where once life flourished. It was not the disappearance of the kelp itself at first, but the removal of its protector that set the unraveling in motion. In tropical rainforests, the story takes another form. Logging and fragmentation carve the forest into islands, each too small to support the full cast of animals and plants. Large mammals vanish first, their ranges too wide for the shrinking patches. With them go the seeds of certain trees, which depended on these animals to disperse them. The forest thins, the canopy opens, and the delicate balance of shade and moisture is lost. Soon the very soil begins to leach away, and the cycle of renewal is broken. What remains is still green, still alive, but it is a ghost of its former self, a simplified, brittle version of the tapestry that once was. Sometimes the collapse is sudden and spectacular, a cascade triggered by a single event. A massive hurricane may flatten a mangrove forest, or a wildfire may sweep through a grassland, consuming all in its path. But more often the change is incremental, a slow erosion, unnoticed until the losses can no longer be denied. Birdsong fades, insects vanish, the soil grows thin and hard. The ecosystem does not so much explode as it quietly fades away. The concept of ecological thresholds, these points of no return, haunts the study of collapse. Scientists have tried to map these boundaries to predict when a system will tip from one state to another. In lakes, a certain concentration of phosphorus may be tolerated. Beyond it, algal blooms erupt. In grasslands, overgrazing may be sustainable up to a point, but cross that line and desertification takes hold. These thresholds are often invisible until they are crossed, and by then the reversal is difficult, if not impossible. Yet even as the tapestry unravels, there are patterns to the loss. Some species are sturdy, able to survive in a wide range of conditions. Others are specialists, exquisitely tuned to a narrow set of circumstances. The generalists, the rats, the pigeons, the cockroaches, often persist or even thrive when the more delicate threads have snapped. What remains after collapse is often a simplified community dominated by a few hardy survivors, the subtle interactions and intricate balances lost. Underlying all of this is the concept of ecosystem services, the benefits that humans and all life derive from these living systems. Clean water, fertile soil, pollinated crops, the regulation of climate and disease, these are not luxuries, but the foundation of our existence. As ecosystems collapse, these services falter. Rivers choke with silt, crops fail, disease spreads. The unraveling tapestry is not only a loss for the wild world, but a threat to our own continuity. There is another layer, too, less tangible, but equally profound, the loss of memory. Each ecosystem is a repository of evolutionary history, a living record of adaptation, cooperation, and struggle. When it collapses, a chapter is erased. The call of the ivory-billed woodpecker, the dance of the golden toad, the migration of millions of passenger pigeons, these are no longer part of the world's story. The tapestry, once rich with colour and detail, is rendered threadbare, its former patterns scarcely imaginable. And yet there are moments, fleeting, fragile, when the unravelling slows or even halts. Sometimes an ecosystem hovers near collapse for years, sustained by the last stubborn survivors and the faint memory of ancient patterns. In other places, the process is abrupt, sudden as a snapped string. Always there is the question, how much can be lost before the whole fabric fails? How many threads can be pulled before the pattern disappears? The study of ecological collapse is a study in humility. It reminds us that resilience is not infinite, that the world's capacity to absorb change is bounded. It asks us to reconsider our place in the weave, to see ourselves not as masters, but as participants, our actions tugging at threads we may not even see. As the night deepens, imagine standing in a forest where the hush is heavy, where the ground is littered with the remains of what once was. The wind stirs the branches, carrying the scent of distant smoke and the faint memory of rain. Somewhere, a moth flutters, a survivor, or the last of its kind. The tapestry is still there, though thinner, still holding, though each thread is stretched to its limit. Overhead, the stars wheel slowly, indifferent to the fate of frogs or forests, to the unraveling of tapestries below. Yet in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the long shadows that stretch before dawn, there are other stories waiting, the stories of recovery, of renewal, of the slow, patient work of reweaving what has been lost. But for now, the unraveling continues, each thread a question, each gap a silent plea for time. And so, as the forest holds its breath and the tapestry strains, we drift onward, drawn by the promise that even in the midst of collapse, the seeds of new patterns may yet lie dormant, waiting for their moment to emerge. There are places in the world where the earth's wounds are visible as scars, a hillside stripped of its trees, a coral reef faded to a ghostly white, a grassland transformed into dust by the wind's relentless hand. These are not only the records of loss, but also, curiously, the laboratories of hope. For as much as nature's collapse is a drama of unraveling, it is also the beginning of another story, the art of healing and the science of observing that healing as it slowly unfolds. In the early half-light of a summer morning, ecologists might set out with their notebooks, boots slick with dew, to walk the edge of a wetland or the charred skeleton of a once thriving forest. Their eyes are trained to see not just what is missing, but the subtle hints of return, a tuft of grass breaking through ash, the iridescent glimmer of a dragonfly skimming a shallow pool, the silence broken by a tentative birdsong. Yet to truly understand the complex choreography of collapse and recovery, scientists have learned to combine these quiet observations with tools that can reach beyond the limits of the senses, tools that can gather data from the scale of a single cell to the sweep of an entire continent. The first task, always, is to notice what was, what is, and what is changing. For this, the most humble and oldest tool of all is the transect, a line stretched across a landscape, along which every living thing is counted, every rock and root recorded. It is an act of devotion to walk such a line, pausing every metre to kneel and inspect the ground, to tally the number of saplings or the richness of fungi, to measure the depth of leaf litter. These measurements are repeated again and again, month after month, year after year. The pattern of return or decline is written not in a single day's glance, but in the accumulation of hundreds of such careful journeys. Yet as the world grows larger and more interconnected, scientists have devised ways to extend their senses, to watch the healing of nature from afar, and sometimes even from above. Satellites orbiting high above the Earth now peer down with unblinking eyes, capturing images that allow us to see the slow greening of a recovering forest, the expansion or contraction of a wetland, the spread of desert across once fertile land. These images, taken in different wavelengths of light, can reveal the hidden work of photosynthesis, the subtle shifts in the health of vegetation, the march of invasive species across unfamiliar terrain. By comparing snapshots taken over years or decades, researchers can chart the pulse of ecosystems as they falter and with luck and patience begin to mend. But healing is rarely simple and never uniform. The collapse of an ecosystem is not like the breaking of a vase, easily shattered and only pieced together with difficulty. It is instead a tangle of relationships, 1,000 threads woven through time. When one thread snaps, others may hold for a while, or fray and break in turn. Sometimes a lost keystone species, like the sea otter in a kelp forest or wolves in a temperate woodland, can trigger cascading changes that ripple outward, altering the very fabric of the ecosystem. The loss of the otters, for instance, unleashes sea urchins, which devour the kelp, which in turn deprives countless creatures of their shelter and food. Here, the art of healing lies in understanding these hidden connections, in learning which threads to mend first, and how to encourage the natural weavers to return. To unravel these mysteries, ecologists have turned to clever experiments, some grand in scale, others almost invisible to the untrained eye. One of the most celebrated took place on the small remote islands of Florida Bay, where researchers sought to understand the intricate dance between mangroves and the creatures that dwell among their tangled roots. By carefully excluding certain fish from the labyrinth of roots and observing the changes that followed in the community of crabs, snails, and algae, scientists revealed a web of influences. Certain fish kept snail populations in check, while snails grazed on algae that, left unchecked, could smother the mangroves. The absence of one partner sent ripples through the entire system, a living demonstration of what is lost when even a single thread is pulled from the weave. Elsewhere, a different kind of experiment is conducted on the scale of decades, even centuries. Long-term ecological research sites, places like the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire or the Konza Prairie in Kansas, are living laboratories where every change is recorded, every shift in species or climate meticulously catalogued. In these places, scientists have watched as forests regrow after logging, as prairies recover from fire, as rivers reclaim their winding paths after dams are removed. The insights gained from these slow experiments are profound. They reveal not only the resilience of nature, but also its fragility, its dependence on patterns of disturbance, and the role of chance and contingency in the process of healing. Sometimes the experiment is unintentional, a consequence of human error or disaster. In the shadow of the Chernobyl reactor, where radiation stilled the human world overnight, scientists returned to observe what would become of the forests, fields, and rivers abandoned by people. To their astonishment, many species flourished in the absence of humans, while others vanished or mutated, their delicate dances with their environment disrupted by the invisible poison lingering in the soil. The Chernobyl exclusion zone became an accidental experiment in the resilience of nature and the limits of recovery, a poignant reminder that healing is often partial, uncertain, and shaped by forces beyond our control. But the art of healing is not only about stepping back and watching what happens next. Increasingly, it is a story of intervention, of careful stewardship, and sometimes of bold creativity. Ecological restoration is both a science and a craft, blending technical knowledge with an almost artistic sense of place. In some cases, the task is to remove what does not belong, pulling up invasive plants, culling alien species, or dismantling dams that choke rivers and fragment habitats. In others, it is to reintroduce what has been lost, to plant native saplings, to rewild landscapes with beavers or bison, to seed coral larvae onto barren reefs. Each intervention is an experiment in itself, guided by theory, but always subject to the unpredictable responses of the living world. Who could have predicted that the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone would not only control elk populations, but set in motion a trophic cascade that transformed the very shape of the rivers, the heights of the willows, the abundance of songbirds? Or that the careful management of fire in an African savanna would unlock hidden reservoirs of biodiversity, coaxing rare grasses and insects from their long dormancy. These stories remind us that healing is not a simple reversal of damage, but a process of renewal, adaptation, and sometimes surprising transformation. To study this process, scientists have developed even more sophisticated tools, devices that listen for the songs of birds in the night, sensors that track the movements of animals with GPS precision, genetic analyses that reveal the hidden histories of populations as they ebb and flow. In the humid understory of a tropical forest, a network of microphones can record the dawn chorus and the evening symphony, capturing the return of species long thought lost. In the depths of the ocean, robotic gliders drift silently, measuring the chemistry of the water and the faint echoes of whales as they wander ancient migratory routes. The data gathered by these tools is immense, a digital tapestry that, when teased apart, can reveal patterns invisible to the naked eye. Yet even the most advanced technology is no substitute for the patient work of observation, the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions, and the humility to accept that not all wounds can be healed in the way we hope. Sometimes recovery takes a different path than expected. New species arrive, old ones do not return, and the landscape is transformed into something novel, yet still alive. Ecologists have come to call these places novel ecosystems, assemblages of organisms and processes that have no historical precedent, shaped by human influence, but capable of sustaining life in new and unexpected forms. In the ruins of abandoned cities, in the aftermath of mining or agriculture, novel forests and wetlands arise, their composition a living record of both loss and resilience. But how do we know when healing has truly occurred? This is one of the thorniest questions in the science of restoration. Is it enough for a forest to regrow, or must it host the same species in the same abundance as before? Should a lake be considered recovered if its waters are clear, even if its fish are strangers to the region? To answer these questions, scientists have devised measures of ecosystem function, the rates at which nutrients are cycled, the productivity of plants, the stability of populations. These metrics offer a window into the inner workings of the ecosystem, suggesting that healing is not only about appearance, but about the return of the vital processes that sustain life. One remarkable experiment, carried out on the grasslands of South Africa, sought to test whether restoration could truly bring back not just the look, but the function of a lost ecosystem. By comparing plots restored with native grasses to those left fallow or invaded by exotics, researchers measured everything from the diversity of insects to the rate at which soil microbes decomposed organic matter. Their findings were subtle. Some functions bounced back quickly, others lagged behind, and certain species never returned at all. The lesson was clear. Healing is a process of compromise, a negotiation between past and present, between what was lost and what is possible now. All the while, the landscape itself is a participant in the experiment, responding to climate, to chance, to the actions of humans and the migrations of animals. In some places, the memory of the ecosystem is long, a seed bank buried deep beneath the soil, a root that persists through years of drought, a dormant egg waiting for the return of water. In others, the memory is fragile, easily erased by a single storm, a plough, or a fire that burns too hot. The work of healing, then, is not only technical, but emotional, a recognition that every act of restoration is both an attempt to mend and a gesture of hope. Science, in this context, becomes a kind of listening to the land, to its silences and its songs, to the stories written in the rings of trees and the layers of sediment. The tools we use, transects and satellites, experiments and models, are ways of making sense of these stories, of translating the language of nature into something we can understand, and perhaps, just perhaps, something we can heal. Yet the work is never finished. For every ecosystem that recovers, another teeters on the brink. For every experiment that brings surprising insight, another reveals the limits of our knowledge or the stubbornness of wounds that refuse to close. But in the slow, patient art of observing and assisting nature's recovery, there is a lesson that goes beyond science, a lesson about humility, about persistence, and about the enduring possibility of renewal even in the most unlikely places. Night falls over the grasslands and forests, over rivers winding back to their ancient channels, over coral reefs stirring with the first signs of colour. The work of healing continues, unseen in the darkness, as seeds germinate, roots intertwine, and creatures return to test the boundaries of the possible. The tools of science are set aside for now, but the questions linger, trailing into the night like the call of an unseen owl. In the quiet, the earth breathes, and the promise of renewal waits for dawn. There are moments on the threshold between night and day when the world seems to hold its breath. In the hush before dawn, the forests, plains and rivers lie shrouded in indigo, every leaf and stone waiting for the first touch of light. It is in these suspended instants, when what has been is not yet fully gone, and what will be has not quite begun, that transformation is most deeply felt. The story of ecosystems is, in many ways, a story of such moments, collapse giving way to renewal, endings braided with beginnings, the hush before the phoenix stirs. The metaphor of the phoenix, rising resplendent from its own ashes, is ancient, woven into the myths of many cultures. Yet the grandeur and agony of this myth finds its reflection in the living world, where ecosystems too have perished in flame or flood, and sometimes, impossibly, returned. There is no magic in this, but there is wonder and a kind of fragile hope. To understand redemption in nature, one must first stand among the ruins. Imagine a forest after fire has swept through, an expanse of scorched trunks, the air still tinged with the acrid memory of smoke. It is a scene of devastation, the collapse of a world. The birds are silent. The undergrowth is gone, reduced to charcoal and ash. Even the soil, stripped of its living skin, seems to mourn. Yet, if you wait, returning season after season, a different story begins to unfold. From the blackened earth, the first shoots of green emerge. These are the pioneers, fireweed, certain grasses, hardy ferns, all adapted to seize the fleeting opportunity that disturbance brings. Their seeds, long dormant, awakened by the heat, now stretched toward the sun. In time, insects return, drawn by the new growth, and with them the birds, the small mammals, the intricate web of life weaving itself back together. The forest does not return as it was, for nothing in nature ever truly repeats. Instead, a new community arises, shaped by the memory of fire, by the changed chemistry of the soil, by the seeds that survived and those that did not. This is ecological succession, a process both patient and restless, as life experiments with forms and strategies, each generation leaving its mark. But redemption is not guaranteed. There are places where the scars run too deep, where the soil has been washed away, or poisoned, or compacted by machines. There are rivers so choked with silt and waste that fish cannot breathe, coral reefs so bleached that their living colours are only a memory. Here, the story of recovery hangs in the balance, dependent not only on the resilience of nature, but on the choices of people. What does it mean, then, to bear witness to both the collapse and the possibility of renewal? There is a peculiar ache in watching an ecosystem unravel, a sense of loss that is both intimate and vast. For we are not only onlookers, we are participants, woven into the fabric of these systems by 1,000 unseen threads. The air we breathe, the water that courses through our veins, the food that sustains us, all are gifts of the living world. When a forest falls silent, a river runs dry, or a prairie is ploughed and paved, something in us is diminished. The philosopher Aldo Leopold once wrote that one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Yet he also believed in the healing power of connection and responsibility. To reflect on redemption, then, is to consider both the capacity of nature to heal and the role we play in that healing. In some places, recovery happens almost in spite of us. When fields are abandoned, cities shrink, or industry retreats, life often reclaims the land. Wolves return to forests, beavers dam forgotten streams, wildflowers bloom in the cracks of concrete. These are stories of rewilding, of nature weaving itself back into the spaces left behind. Sometimes the process is subtle, a gradual infiltration of moss and lichen, the quiet return of songbirds. Other times it is dramatic, as when a dam is breached and a river surges back to life, carving new channels, inviting salmon and otters and willow trees to return. Yet there are also acts of deliberate redemption, where people become partners in recovery. Across the planet, communities are restoring wetlands, planting native trees, removing invasive species, and reintroducing lost animals. Each effort is a kind of wager, a belief that the world can be made whole again, or at least less wounded. The work is slow, sometimes frustrating, often uncertain. Progress is measured in saplings and frog eggs, in the return of fireflies, in the first otter sliding into a cleansed stream. In these acts there is a profound emotional resonance, a sense of restoration, not just of landscapes, but of hope. Children planting mangrove seedlings in coastal mud, elders recalling the songs of vanished birds, scientists and volunteers counting the fragile shoots of a rare orchid. These are rituals of belonging, gestures of faith. The future in such moments feels less like a distant abstraction and more like a living promise, rooted in the earth. There is a paradox here, for while nature's resilience is remarkable, it is not infinite. Ecosystems can recover from fire, flood, and even the absence of keystone species, but there are thresholds beyond which return is no longer possible. Extinction is a door that closes forever. When a lineage is lost, when the last individual dies, the world is changed in ways that cannot be undone. The stories of the dodo, the passenger pigeon, the thylacine, these are not tales of renewal, but of silence. And yet, even as we mourn these losses, we find meaning in the persistence of life. The black-footed ferret, once thought gone, returned from the brink through the work of scientists and the patience of prairie dogs. The California condor, soaring again over canyons after years of absence, a living emblem of redemption. There are forests in Europe where bison now graze, descendants of a handful of survivors, their heavy steps pressing hope into the soil. To witness these rebirths is to be reminded that our actions matter. The health of our planet is not an abstraction. It is a reflection of the choices we make, the values we uphold, the stories we tell ourselves about our place in the world. When we see ourselves as separate from nature, as conquerors or consumers, we foster division and depletion. But when we recognize our interdependence, our kinship with the wild, with the soil, with one another, the possibility of redemption expands. There is an emotional dimension to this recognition, one that science alone cannot fully capture. It is the sense of awe that comes with seeing a whale breach in a newly protected bay, or hearing the chorus of frogs return after the first rains fill a restored wetland. It is the quiet joy of finding wild strawberries in a meadow that was once a monoculture of crops, or watching children chase butterflies where there was once only dust. These moments are not just data points or indicators of recovery. They are reminders of what it means to be alive, to belong, to care. The philosopher Joanna Macy speaks of the Great Turning, a shift from a society rooted in extraction and exploitation to one built on regeneration and respect. This turning is not inevitable, nor is it easy. It demands courage, to acknowledge the wounds of the world, to mourn what has been lost, and to act with humility and resolve. It requires us to listen not only to the scientists and the poets, but to the land itself, to the rivers and the winds, to the stories held in seeds and stones. In the shadow of collapse, it is tempting to turn away, to shield ourselves from grief or guilt. But in facing these feelings, we find, paradoxically, the energy to act. Grief becomes a form of love, a testament to connection. Guilt, when acknowledged and transformed, becomes responsibility. Redemption, then, is not the erasure of the past, but the willingness to learn from it, to repair, to imagine new futures. The health of the planet and the fate of humanity are not separate stories. They are strands of a single braid, each shaping and shaped by the other. Our cities pulse with energy harvested from ancient sunlight. Our bodies are composed of atoms forged in the hearts of stars and cycled through countless generations of life. The air we exhale becomes the breath of trees. The rain that falls on distant mountains fills our cups. To heal the earth is, in a deep and literal sense, to heal ourselves. And so the phoenix rises, not in a blaze of sudden glory, but in the patient unfolding of leaves after fire, in the slow return of otters to a once poisoned stream, in the quiet determination of communities coming together to tend the wounds of the world. Each act of restoration is a vote for the future, a statement of faith that what has been broken can, in some measure, be made whole. This is not a simple story. Recovery is rarely linear. It is marked by setbacks and surprises, by moments of despair and flashes of hope. The path is winding, sometimes vanishing altogether, sometimes opening suddenly into unexpected clearings. But in walking this path, we discover not only the resilience of nature, but the resilience of the human spirit. We find ourselves changed too in the process. The work of restoration, whether planting trees, cleaning rivers, or simply bearing witness, cultivates patience, humility, and wonder. It reminds us that we are not masters of the earth, but stewards, participants in a drama that began long before us and will continue long after. It teaches us to live with uncertainty, to embrace complexity, to celebrate the wild beauty that persists even in the most wounded places. In the end, the story of the phoenix is not about escaping destruction, but about transformation. It is about finding meaning in the ashes, about trusting that life can emerge from loss, about forging connections that endure. The world is full of such stories, of forests returning, rivers healing, species recovering, communities reimagining their relationship with the land. As night gives way to dawn, as the hush before morning breaks, the world is remade over and over in the interplay of light and shadow, death and renewal. The song of the earth is never finished. It is composed anew with every heartbeat, every breath, every act of care. In this ongoing dance, we are both witnesses and participants. Our future is entangled with the future of forests, rivers, grasslands, and seas. To honor this connection is to step into the work of redemption, not as saviors, but as kin, as caretakers, as storytellers, bearing witness to the resilience and beauty of the living world. And so the phoenix rises, quietly, persistently, in every place where life returns. The story is not over. It unfolds with every season, every gesture of hope, every promise made in the hush before the dawn. As our journey through the delicate dance of ecosystems drifting to a close, we watch like stardust settling after a comet's gentle blaze. May this quiet reflection ripple softly through your thoughts, inviting peaceful wonder until we meet again beneath the velvet canopy of Dreamtime Tales.